Brett, you've navigated some pretty incredible highs and some maybe you might consider devastating lows throughout your career. If someone met you today and knew nothing of your story, how would you explain what truly drives you?
Wow, it's a pretty big question. From a career standpoint, I was somebody that had like all the everything that you kind of would want from a career standpoint. Good schools, good jobs early on, but always had a desire to do something new, do something on my own, and had some successes, but also had a time when um, I had an opportunity to do something on my own. There are other people involved, people put money in, partners, and we did well for a while, but ultimately we failed. And the business failed. And when the business failed, and I don't want it to sound too passive, it was my fault. I mean, it was decisions I made along the way that positioned us just with too much risk. So probably more than anything, from a business standpoint, um, that drives me because I know that a lot of the things that happened, it's not rocket science. Could have been prevented, could have been changed. And now with the tools I have, in addition to my experience, I think I can help people not just avoid that, but end up building great business.
Do you feel comfortable kind of going through some of those risks that
Yeah,
you kind of put the company in?
yeah, yeah. So, kind of background. I was, typical kind of business training. Um, Went to a good college, worked in banking for a few years, got my MBA, consulting, turnarounds, insurance, we were talking about earlier. And then when I went on my own, I was consulting and had an opportunity to get involved in a little healthcare company, a little diabetes healthcare company. A friend of mine owned, and my business partner and I invested in it. Um, Went well for about a year. And then he had a family tragedy, pulled out of the business. Business got in trouble and we took it over. And we were able to grow that business well. We got it fixed, ended up with a really good business given this environment we're in. In this, that's a real fragmented space. It was diabetes supplies and medications. So at $13 million, we were probably one of the 80 or 90 biggest businesses. So it's very fragmented, right? Not huge businesses, but we had a good business, and we were doing well. Um, but as things started to change, as margins started to change, and some of this is Medicare rules, some of this was just you know things getting tighter from a procurement standpoint from all the insurance companies. Um, we started to double down on the medication side of the business, which is lower margin, required a lot more leverage. So I kind of took us down that path, thinking that it would differentiate us from our competition. And in a way it did, but it just exposed us to too much risk. I mean,
Yeah, what led you down that path? Because I mean, I guess was differentiation the reason? I mean, is that what drove you to do it? And you thought that that would give you some sort of competitive advantage, or was there something else that started you down that path?
it it was I was probably a victim of our capabilities. Because we had the capabilities, we had a pharmacy that we had, and a lot of our competitors didn't. So we had a pharmacy that we had launched for the ability of being able to provide comprehensive services to people with diabetes. Um, and it did differentiate us, and it was fine in that respect. Um, I think what happened really was it was fear, and fear is not a great motivator. I was afraid that we would not be able to grow our business and achieve our goals purely on the medical equipment side, and especially given the things that are going with Medicare. So I looked at the medication side and said, this will be our way to provide more and serve our existing clients, and also provide some diversification that would protect us.
So you mentioned Medicare a couple times,
Mhm.
and I mean, so we work with lawyers a lot, and I've interviewed I don't know how hundreds of lawyers at this point. And sometimes we'll see where people will overreact to outside influences. So you're talking about Medicare, and like immigration's a big thing right now where, there might be outside influences on that practice area. How do you balance maybe reacting too much to an outside influence like Medicare pricing, versus, like, so underreacting, I guess. How do you balance those two?
Um, I don't know that there's a balance as much as there is defining, look, these are the people that we're best prepared to serve. This is what we're passionate about. This is what we're great at. These are the people we're going to serve. And if it turns out that in this case, an external influence like Medicare starts, adding complexity, well, then there's a decision to be made. Am I going to dial back that part of the business and emphasize something else?
Sure.
Which I think would be the right decision to make, rather than what I made was, well, I'll just move to a different product set, which we just were not big enough to compete at the highest levels in.
Because what ultimately ended up happening with that company?
We failed. We ended up having to shut down the business. We sold part of it. We served our customers well and did a lot of the right things, but ultimately we shut down the business, and I lost pretty much everything I had. When I started my EOS career, it was pretty dire.
So is that what drove you into EOS?
It was what caused me to very quickly burn the boats, as we say in the EOS world. So when I exited that business, we had used EOS in that business and had done well, but I'd self-implemented. Okay, and so I didn't have a coach looking at me and saying, "Look, I was doing the tools well, but I didn't have a coach looking at me and saying, "Look, you're going down a path here that you might want to understand the risk better." But we'd used EOS. I understood it. When I exited that business, a friend of mine needed help putting EOS in his business. So I sat in the integrator seat. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the details of EOS.
Very, very, very.
So I sat in the integrator seat, and we hired an outside implementer. And I saw what it would have looked like if I'd have done it right. So I went and got the EOS training. But certainly the fact that I was broke was an advantage early on.
It's interesting to me that you used EOS. It did not work. And I mean, did you know when you were running it that it wasn't working because you didn't have a coach?
Oh, it worked. I just didn't work.
Interesting. Okay.
It worked. EOS worked. The tools worked. The systems worked. We grew the business. We hit our goals. Okay? But I didn't build a healthy team. So in the EOS world, we always talk about three things: vision, traction, and healthy. Crystal clear vision. We did a pretty good job at that. Traction, we did a great job at that. We didn't build a healthy team. I thought that I could make all the decisions and be the smartest guy in the room, and that was and honestly, as egotistical as it sounds, I thought I was coming from a good place. I thought I was doing it in the way that would best serve my clients and my employees.
Yeah.
I was just wrong.
What would you say makes for a healthy team?
Let me tell you what it looks like.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's start with what it looks like, and then what makes for it is a little harder. So a healthy team is a team where you have a lot of conflict, but respectful conflict, right? Yeah. We talk a lot about Patrick Lencioni's model from the 5 dysfunctions of a team. It's a team where people are willing to speak up, right? And so if I'm sitting in a room and I have a visionary or CEO and owner of a business, and he or she has 5 people also in the room with them, my expectation is that any of them are going to pitch in and lean in and argue and debate and discuss and hammer out issues, regardless of their function, regardless of their position in the business, because they trust each other enough that they'll have that conflict. If they'll have the conflict and then issues get surfaced, right? You take my situation. If we'd had a healthy team, I think somebody would have said, look, look, you're taking some risks. We also took some risks from an insurance standpoint in that we had some insurance contracts that really held us over a barrel in terms of what we could do. And I think somebody would have raised that, and we would have protected against those risks sooner.
Was the team just afraid to speak up?
Probably.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because myself and the president of the business, the kind of maybe my right hand man or number two, whatever you want to call him, very strong personalities, very direct communicators, and didn't leave room for other people to speak up.
I think this is really, really helpful for law firm owners specifically, but just business owners in general to hear, because they might be in the same boat. It reminds me of, and I can't remember where I'd read this, but I think they were Korean pilots where there were incidences where there was a spike, and hopefully I'm not picking on the wrong country, but where the second in command, so I think they're called the lieutenant or whatever they're called, but they would not speak up
Right.
whenever the captain was making a critical, fatal error that killed everyone on the plane.
Right.
And they just never spoke up. And they knew,
because culturally it wasn't
exactly.
Permitted.
Whereas in like some Western countries, the second command had no problem speaking up. How can you foster that sort of an environment where people they're okay with speaking up? They're not afraid to challenge the boss or challenge other people. How do you foster that?
So there's a couple of ways to answer it. One is when we think about from an EOS standpoint, how do we foster it? We teach it, but teaching's only going to get you so far. So this is something we're modeling from the first time we're with people. It's getting everybody in the room to speak up. Our first day, if you and I were to implement EOS, our first day together, about 3 hours in, we're going to bring you into some pretty serious conflict or tension about our accountability chart, who sits where and who should really be on the team. And that's where we start inviting everybody in the team to speak up, right? And so it's a learned behavior. Right.
I've always been curious about EOS coaches, how they're able to go into a business kind of like a law firm, and it could. You have personal injury law firms we were talking about before about different people that are in the guild, like family law. It could be criminal defense. They're all operated a little differently because they just do different practice areas. Some spend a lot of time in court, some don't. How are you able to go in and analyze those firms and kind of determine what the seat should be on the bus and who should go in those seats? I'm sure some of it's pretty basic, but there are, with different niches, there are different ways of operating them. So I do wonder how you're able to do that.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, if we're doing it, my job is not to analyze the firm and decide who should sit where. My job, I'm actually, if I'm willing to wade into the discomfort, because look, we get just as uncomfortable as our clients. If I'm willing to wade into the discomfort of not knowing what it should look like, then I can do a better job. Because my job is to observe the team and let the team get to the conclusion of who should be where and what the seat should be. When I say seats, I'm thinking, an accountability chart.
Right. Yeah.
How should we structure the business? And my job is to let the team get there. Certainly I'm going to help them. And I can give them examples and models, and here's the way I've done it at different places. And bringing forth the experience and real examples really helps them a lot. But I have to make sure that I don't get too vested in the answer, because I want to get them to, here's what we think the seat should be, and here's who we think who should be in each seat, and let them own that decision. And realize that EOS is an iterative process. If we don't get it right, it'll clean itself out.
Right. That's I think it sounds like a very wise way of doing it too. What's interesting is it does seem like a lot of law firm owners, they know the things that they're supposed to do. It's almost like they need someone to not really tell them, but just kind of like draw it out of them almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I race bicycles for fun. I know what to do, but if I write a check to a coach, I tend to listen to him or her.
Yeah.
And it's not just the money, but it's I know what to do, but I know 38 things to do. If I have somebody that I trust and I paid that says, okay, do this week and this week and this week, it's not that I couldn't figure that out on my own. It's that I've got other stuff to do.
Yeah.
And that bit of clarity and focus is worth a lot.
If you were going to start a company from scratch using EOS, how can you determine who might fit on the team? Are there ways of finding the right people to be on the team if you're starting from scratch? Because I know going into a company is a little different because they're already sort of established. But like starting from scratch, how can you kind of get the right people on the team?
So if you're starting from scratch, right, it's harder because you haven't really crafted much of a culture, right? But the first thing is try to find people that fit your values.
Yeah.
Which in itself is hard to determine if you're on your own.
Right.
But what you need to do is find somebody that can help you determine what your real core values are, and then do your best to find people that share those core values.
So let's talk about values then. I think that's a good segue into that. Walk me through the process of developing like core values for a company.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
I'll tell you the way we do it, which I've done it a lot of different ways, and of course I'm biased, but I think this is the best way to do it. When I get a team in a room, and usually our leadership teams are, let's say, 4 to 7 people. This is the people that run the business. I give them a couple minutes to think and say, listen, come up with the names of 3 people in your business that are real culture heroes. These are people like, if I had 100 of them, I could storm hell with water pistols, right? These people are the ones I want with me. And we put those 3 people's name on the board, and it'll be more than 3, right? We'll go around the room, but there'll be 3, maybe 4 that stand out. They got 5 check marks, right? Yeah. Erase the other names and say, what is it about them? Just fill up your paper with everything about them. This is all their characteristics. Not they're good at Excel macros. I don't care about their technical abilities, but we will care about the technical abilities later. But they're positive and they serve others and they're just dedicated to this, whatever it is about the way they're wired. And we'll end up with 50, 2 to 4 word phrases on the board. And then we just start compartmentalizing them or categorizing them is a better term. And you'll find out of those 50 things, there's 6 or 7 or 8 themes. And so you'll group those together. Now, why do we do this? Okay, just stop here. Why do we do that? Okay, why do we ask people who they like? Because who do we really like? We like ourselves. Okay, but it's hard for us to tell all the good things about ourselves. So we find somebody that reminds us of ourselves and tell the good things about them, which is really the process I'm getting people to do. Pull out who you are. Okay, because what we want is the values of that team. We don't want Google values. We don't want the values of the whole company. We want the values of that team. Okay? And this is something that is hard for people sometimes to get their arms around because they're like, well, that sounds so exclusive if you're saying that these are the only values that matter. We're not saying these are the only values that matter. We're saying we want all sorts of values and diversity and all kinds of stuff, but there needs to be a handful of things that are non-negotiables. And that's what we're trying to define.
Have you, this is more out of curiosity than anything else, have you gone into a company, you went through that exercise, and then the things that they put on the board were like, I don't know if I'm on board with that. Anything like that? Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, and the reason is because sometimes they're not genuine. Sometimes you can tell, look, these are things that we think we should say, right? These are things we Googled. When we knew this session was coming up, we Googled these things. Now, after we get these on the wall, we run them through a few tests. And again, this is Patrick Lencioni. Are you familiar with Patrick Lencioni?
Yeah, I am, yeah.
This is Lencioni stuff. And so there are a few values that are killers, right? One, the biggest offenders we call permission to play values, right? Things like integrity, honesty and things that should be table stakes, right? I mean, you don't need to tell people you're honest, right? I mean, if you tell people you're honest, they're almost like, well, I'm not sure I believe you if you have to say it. So there's some of these things that are just, they're table stakes. And those just kind of weaken, remove the integrity of the whole thing. So we need to throw those out. There's some things that are aspirational, okay? And it's okay if I aspire to it, I'm committed to it, and I think I can get there. That's fine. But sometimes things are so aspirational, they're not even who we are. You know, I had a group one time and we said, look, we just don't work hard. Yeah, I had hard work on the board. They're like, we just don't work hard. Okay? At least they're honest about it. Okay. Now, if they just said, we don't work as hard as we should, but we're committed to it, then we'd leave it on the board. But they're just like, we just don't work hard. Right. So that's an aspirational thing, take it off. Okay. And then there's some things that are accidental. I had a core value in my business when I did this on my own of flexibility. I thought that was great. Okay. You need to be flexible at this company. You need to go do this and do that. And what I had was institutionalized chaos. Because when this area was behind, people would run over there. And we had people running all over the place doing other people's jobs rather than holding people accountable for their work.
What do you mean it was accidental?
It's an accidental value. It came as something that we encouraged. It got applauded and became institutionalized. It's good for you to go here and go here and go all over the place. And sometimes that's good, okay? But we need to let people own their own areas or we never realize who's not being accountable and doing their job.
What are some other filters you go through?
We do those 3, and then we compare them to the people in the room. Let's do a little analysis. Let's go around the room and say, did these really fit these people? We call it the people analyzer, which is a tool in EOS. But we do the second part of the people analyzer. I'm sorry, the first part, which is the right person part of the people analyzer. And we go through and see if it really fits the people in the room.
And so, and you'll talk about this. So, and I always get these confused. Traction is the one where it's like the story, right? The books.
Traction's the textbook. That's
okay. Yes,
it's the overall book.
And what's the other? Rocket Fuel.
Get a Grip is the story.
Get a Grip. There we go. Thank you.
Yep.
Because I always get those confused. And then you have Rocket Fuel, right? Is that the other one?
Rocket Fuel is the book about visionaries and integrators.
Gotcha. Okay. So, but Get a Grip. That one's great because they do talk about that. That can be a painful process, though, the people filter, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm guessing if you were just doing it yourself, you would not probably force yourself to go through that pain as much as if you had a coach that can kind of take some of the heat.
Right. It's almost impossible. Again, I'm not saying you can't self-implement, but if I'm the leader of the business and I'm trying to orchestrate and facilitate that with my group, people are just going to shut down. Yeah. It's almost impossible for me to do that. And
as the coach, are you staying in touch with them throughout? Like, so, because how often do you meet with the companies?
So early on, the first 60 days, we have 3 sessions, but after that, it's quarterly.
Gotcha. So how do you make sure that they are doing those things in between the sessions? So you go through the first 3 sessions, and then every quarter, I guess, because I'm sure that you've probably seen a lot of excuses where I just don't have time. We've been busy, all that kind of stuff. We're growing so much. How do you kind of fight through that to make sure that they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing?
I send emails just as nudges. Now I don't know how many of them actually get read, but I send emails. I have check-in calls, 1 or 2 between each session, each quarter. And then I'm available anytime people want to talk. So I'm at their disposal. Now, I'm forcing it on them a couple of times a quarter, and then I'm at their disposal other times. And usually that works. Now, if I find out, if we get in session and people aren't getting their rocks done, they're not doing the work, then we might have to turn that up some. But ultimately, it's their decision, right? I'm there if they want help. But other than a couple of check-ins, I'm not going to force myself on them.
What would you say is the piece of EOS that company or owners resist the most, and what breakthroughs have you seen, or what breakthroughs typically happen when they finally embrace that thing, whatever that thing is?
Probably two things. One is taking all of the EOS tools through every level of the organization. And depending on the size of the business, it's not as hard. 30-person organization, not that big a deal. 200-person organization, the idea of taking rocks and measurables and level 10 meetings all the way to the people that are at the ground level of the organization, to a lot of owners seems like that's silly. And what's really in the back of their minds, and I was the worst of the worst, so I don't mean this too critically, is they think those people don't care. And the fact is they do.
Yeah.
They care. They care about the vision. They care where the company's going, and they would like to have the tools that make them more effective. So that, when they feel like, hey, I can't take the tools to the very lowest level organization, that hinders the effectiveness of the implementation. Now, every once in a while, I'll come across an owner that what's really in his or her mind, and this is usually the men, okay, not to be sexist, but it's usually the men, and it's usually in trades or construction, that don't want to take it down to the next level because they prefer to be one of the guys. I don't want to bring the business stuff down to the next level because I'd rather go out and be one of the guys and not bring the corporate stuff, so to speak.
Yeah.
That we got to fix. That's a killer. So either way, that's not getting the tools down lowest level organization. The second thing is the process component of EOS. And look, I don't think anybody became an entrepreneur so they could document processes. Like, I don't think anybody likes it. I mean, there's somebody that likes it, but people resist that because it feels so bureaucratic.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if we get that done, and if we can ever get them to do it, whenever they go to sell their business, they'll thank us for it because it could mean a zero.
Yeah. Do you work with any professional services firms at all?
Yeah, a lot.
Do you see any differences between those types of companies and then like non-professional services companies?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And some of it is the way we need to set them up. Professional service firms tend to be more of what I call a business unit focus. So you take a construction company that has, let's just say they have sales and marketing, operations, finance, maybe safety. They've got 4 seats or so, and those run the functions. An engineering firm isn't necessarily going to have that. They might have sales and marketing, but then they might have a civil business unit and a wastewater business unit and 3 or 4 business units that need to operate as profit centers. So we need to set their accountability charts up differently. Think about the way we treat them a lot differently. Yeah. The other thing is with that, then we have to make sure that we're teaching each of those profit center owners almost to act like an integrator in a sense. They have their own little business unit. So it's just a little different approach.
That's interesting. That adds a layer of complexity that it can make it, I'm sure, challenging to run EOS.
It can, but it's to me the funnest part about EOS is using it. And you'll hear implementers talk about using EOS purely. Think
Sure.
of it as a recipe, and if you change an ingredient, it's going to make the recipe not as good.
Right.
On the other hand, if one of those ingredients doesn't work for you and we just try to force it on you, that's not going to work for you either. So what we got to do is make the system fit you without weakening the system. And that's the really fun part.
So is that, I guess, for companies that have multiple niches, I guess, is that how you would do that as well? You have like an integrator for each niche?
It's not technically an integrator.
Okay.
Right. But in a sense, that's a role that person needs to be able to fill. So if you have you could take the engineering firm, or you could take I've got a financial planning client that's now graduated that has that has offices in multiple cities. Each of those cities is kind of a standalone business unit. So that the person that leads that, let's call him the general manager. He or she needs to be able to run sales, ops, and even maybe a little bit of finance for that business unit. Now, we'll try to pull as much as we can to the centralized level. It ends up being more of a shared services format, where my finance and HR centrally, sales, ops, and that might be it. Maybe a little compliance at each office.
Yeah. So you've said before that business life can be simple if you let it. It's a quote that I pulled off the internet. What do you think that we as business owners, so specifically law firms, but businesses in general, what do you think that we're overcomplicating, and how does EOS cut through that?
The idea that it can be simple if we let it is that if we have the right people in the organization, then we don't need to manage as much stuff as we try to manage. EOS, and one of the things I love about EOS is we're saying, like, what's the 20% of the stuff that we need to focus on and drive to get 80% of the results? Recognizing that past, it's like moving up any curve, past 80% effectiveness, those gains are hard to get. And to try to manage for that rather than hire the right people for that is something most entrepreneurs don't want to do. Again, what I mean is let's take care of the things we can control. Let's manage them well. Let's remove the variability from those things. And then let's trust people to handle the stuff around the margin. EOS really helps us to answer were you about to ask something?
No.
To answer the second part of your question, EOS really helps with that. It also can hurt with that. And so where I've seen people get off base, and I've seen this with a lot of people, I've seen it even with some EOS implementers, is they try to turn EOS into a system for managing and controlling everything. And if you use one of the EOS software tools, what you can do is you can wrap up everything in EOS. I got control over everything. That's not what it's for. It's to shine a white hot light on the most important things and let the other stuff be managed by competent people.
So I'm going to give you, it's not even pushback. It's more of I guess we don't use EOS in our firm. We used EOS for a while inside of Maximum Aware as a company.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I guess I'll just say I just don't like about EOS, I'll just say it that way, I guess. And you can tell me how I can resolve this myself in my head, is the separate dashboard for everything. I feel like there was a lot of manual entry that is not sort of connected to the rest of my firm. And I found that frustrating. So help me resolve that.
What do you mean the separate dashboard?
So we were using a company that worked with EOS at the time. I don't think you all work with them anymore, and I can't remember the name of it. It was a software that we would have to.
There's a handful of them. There's Traction Tools. Back in the day, there's Traction Tools, now Bloom.
Yeah, it was
90.io.
It was 90.io.
Which we still work with. They're still licensed.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So I thought for some reason you all didn't anymore. But I didn't like the manual entry where we would go through when it comes to like numbers and all that. We would manually enter that stuff in as opposed to like it pulling the data automatically from the company or from the firm. Yeah. Are there other tools that will automatically extract that information so we're not having to manually put it in?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So maybe part of the process is it's important that it does that.
Yeah, I guess my question to you would be how many, because your scorecard at your leadership team level should have a maximum of 15 items on it.
Sure.
Hopefully, 7, 8, 9.
Right.
It's not that much to enter each week.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess I'm more talking about like the way we do things. We have like KPIs and all that for the firm, and so we have. I'm just more talking about that stuff, and it's been a while since I've used 90.io.
I hear you.
Yeah. So it's more of that information that I kind of wanted more. I wanted more out of it, and
from a tool standpoint.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
maybe this is just market research you can use to take back, and you all can develop your own.
Yeah, I think, we're all, whether it be EOS has a tool called EOS 1, there's Bloom, 90, they're subject to whatever operating system, can we get the exports from there?
Right.
I guess I might challenge you and say, we were talking about earlier, were you trying to manage too much? If I, for example, if I run the business, I've got my scorecard at the leadership team level. If somebody on my team is running an L10 with their direct reports and they have a scorecard, that's for them to manage.
Right.
They should only have a handful of items. Now, if I, as the leader of the business, am trying to make sure those get entered and run herd on those, I could see that getting to be a lot of work.
Gotcha. So something else you've said is that, or you've shared that human mind can only juggle so many priorities at once. And can you walk us through how EOS leverages that limitation to create better, more focused leaders?
That's true, right? We can only juggle so many things. As a matter of fact, most neuroscientists would argue that you can only do one thing at a time.
Well, Jason Sugg is my coach, and that's his main thing.
Yeah.
Is like you focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah, the idea of multitasking is a farce.
Right.
That's EOS is a focus system.
Yep.
I said earlier what it wasn't. It's not a system for trying to manage and control everything. It's a focus system. So again, what we're saying is, look, let's come together quarterly, and let's decide what our rocks are. Let's make sure we're still good on what we're measuring. Let's set our objectives, our rocks and to-dos and things for the next quarter. And then if we do that work right, we should be confident we're focused on the right things. And we're going to back that confidence up once a week. Once a week, I want to ask myself 3 questions. Did I do my best job driving my existing machine? Okay, and our scorecard tells us yes on that. Did I do my best preparing for future growth? And our rocks tells us that. Did I take care of the people around me? Our customer employee headlines do that. So between that quarterly and weekly cadence, we should get confidence. And confidence is the best focus tool.
So something I get pushback from is having daily huddles and the quarterly meetings and then the L10 meetings. It is interesting having how important those are to our firm.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things of EOS that we use. I guess if I were to differentiate, I'd say more of a scaling up model versus EOS, but they're both fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think the EOS is awesome. I think scaling up with Vern Harnish, the way they do things is fantastic too. But we do get a lot of pushback about the meetings, the regular meetings and the cadences. I think that they're absolutely crucial. So will you talk about the when it comes to having the regular cadence, and the benefits of that?
Yeah. So a lot of times we get pushback too.
Yeah.
By the way, the meeting cadence with EOS is you have 2-day annual planning, full day quarterlies, and weekly level 10 meetings. So that's it.
Yep.
Now, if you bring in a lot of other things, and this is where you have to use your judgment, are you also going to have a daily stand-up? Some people love those.
Yeah.
Look, if I told a car dealership, stop having a daily huddle, they'd be, well, I'm going to throw out the system, right? You just got to do it. So some people love them. But the meeting cadence, again, is the idea that I can maintain my confidence. I can do 3 things on a weekly basis: connect with my boss and peers, get held accountable for my rocks, measures, whatever else I'm accountable for, and get my issues solved. And again, again, in my mind, and this is, I don't know, this is what EOS would say is that what I'm trying to do is create confidence. Because my neurotic mind, when I was running my business, I was never concerned about, am I doing a good job with what I'm doing? I was always concerned, am I doing the right things? Am I focused on the right things?
Yeah.
And this little voice in my head was like, oh, you're working on the wrong stuff. That gives us confidence. And then being able to focus your mind on those things rather than the 13 things I think I should be doing instead,
Right.
creates a lot better result.
I think the huddles too, to me, the huddles are such a powerful tool because, and I call them just feedback loops. You get these regular feedback loops for so the weekly meetings, it's a feedback loop, right? You've got
Mhm.
the daily huddle, the feedback loop. You've got the quarterly meeting, that sort of feedback loop where you're constantly improving. I think there's a ton of benefits in that, and you can resolve a lot of issues in just that daily huddle, just really quick on the spot, boom, done, move on, that are not going to fester
Yeah.
for an entire quarter.
Yeah. I mean, a huddle or a level 10 meeting, in the level 10 meeting, less so maybe the huddle, but they have the advantage of I don't have to take everything that pops in my mind and go interrupt somebody.
Right.
It can wait. Yeah. 80% of it can wait. And so just from a time management standpoint, if I know I have a level 10 coming up in 3 days, then I don't have to, well, I mean, it'll happen to me 3 times today. Right. Instead of calling my assistant and interrupting her and interrupting me and, running into the person next to me on the interstate, I can just, put it on my issues list.
So when it comes to that idea is what, I don't know if you've read the book, A World Without Email by chance?
No.
Okay. They talk about in that
Sounds
book,
wonderful though.
It's a fantastic book. And they talk about how if you go kind of like back in the 70s, 80s, you couldn't just send an email or a message, right? So you could
to think about it.
Yeah, it could take you 5-10 seconds and you've now created an hour of work for some other person because of some message that you sent. You had to stand up. You probably had to write it on a note. You had to walk down the hallway and talk to Bob. And by the time you started walking down the hallway, you're like, okay, maybe this isn't that important. And it is. So what we've implemented office hours. So, and what we found is like, you don't have that just firing off of a message saying, hey, I need this thing, where you're not creating an hour of work for people. So I want to get your thoughts on that now that you kind of mentioned that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at least from an EOS standpoint, let me give you kind of a different spin on it. A lot of times I'll have people, and oftentimes it's I work with a lot of contracting firms. And so it's people that are solving problems a lot. And I'll get this answer. I don't need to have a level 10. So I talk to my guys all day, every day. Like, that's why you need to have a level 10. You need to do something other than talking. You need to have some time where you're actually doing some work and not interacting all the time. There needs to be some interaction. And if the house is on fire, we need to put it out, right? But we need some type of cadence where issues and things can wait. It's the same thing as you're saying. Rather than just go ask a question, right? Maybe take some time and try to solve the problem yourself, and you'll try to learn it. Right? This is what I do at home. I don't look for anything. I just ask my wife.
Yeah.
Right? If I would look for something every now and then, I might learn where it is and be able to find it myself next time.
Well, hopefully she'll listen to this and
Hold it against
your
me.
admission.
Yeah.
Exactly. We got the admission. I want to talk about accountability.
Okay.
So we had gone through, I don't know if you've ever heard of top grading, but we had really focused on, bringing in top talent, raising pay, all that kind of stuff. And the thing that we found was that some people didn't like being held accountable, and those end up being the people that end up hitting the road. And talk about how EOS helps with accountability and making sure that people are doing the things that they need to be doing, the important things that they need to be doing.
Yeah. The whole system is designed to create accountability. But let me maybe highlight 2 things. One, in my mind, clarity and accountability live together. Okay? So without clarity, it's really hard to drive accountability. Okay? And also, if you find you have somebody that is confusing an otherwise fairly simple subject, they're trying to avoid accountability. Okay? So, and we all have these people, right? We sometimes call it disagreement masquerading as confusion. It should be simple, but I'm gonna make it really complicated to avoid accountability. So clarity and accountability live together. The other thing that we need to remember as we're implementing this, and I'm gonna ask you this because I've asked this question a bunch of times. I don't know that this is right, so now I have an expert. What does every contract have to be valid?
I'm definitely not a contract, or definitely not an expert. I'm not. Well, it's funny.
But you're more expert than me.
Yeah, it's funny because we're prohibited from calling ourselves experts. At least in the state of Missouri, we are ethically. But we have to have consideration.
There you go.
Exactly.
See, I heard that one time, and so if I'm trying to hold you accountable, think about consideration. I don't mean nice consideration.
Sure,
I mean, I'm saying, look, Tyler, I want you to do something. Okay. And what I need to know and what you need to know is what I'm going to do to help you.
Yep.
Okay. So if I say do something and you're a good, soldier, so to speak, you'll probably go do it. Okay. But what I have then is compliance. Remember now flipping back to the Lencioni, you've got trust, conflict, commitment. If I just say go do something, I don't have commitment. I got compliance. And that's a very different animal. Compliance is I'm going to do what I'm told, but I may not run through a wall for it. On the other hand, if I say, here's what I need you to do, here's why it's important, what do you need from me? And we agree, and you nod your head like you're nodding right now, but you're really committed now. And that is subtle, but it's the most powerful thing in the world. Because you have agreed, yes, if you do this for me, I'll do this. And so this idea of holding people accountable is kind of silly. What we really need to do is drive commitment. I don't want to hold anybody accountable.
I like the way I like the change of that. I do like that. And I guess is what we were lacking was the commitment part of it. Yeah. I like that. That's really interesting. What do you think about the question? A friend of mine, Christopher Nicolason, kind of gave this to me. And I use it quite often, where employee comes and kind of asks about what they need to do on a certain thing, whatever the task may be. We're working on a case, and you flip it. Well, what do you think we should do? Where it's a form of getting commitment, I guess. Although it's more of having them kind of come to the same conclusion, and then you can kind of work your way down to commitment. I do wonder what your thoughts are on that. I think it's been wonderful for us, but I wonder what your thoughts are on it.
I think it's great. I think it's great as long as we're not asking leading questions.
Okay.
Right? If we know the answer, well, let me rephrase it. I shouldn't have this wrong. If the employee says, if I walk up to an employee and say, Tyler, should you really punch that client in the face? Right? That's not a great question, right? You know the answer. So somebody says, what should I do? And I say, look, well, I don't know, tell me more. Tell me about the situation. Let's unpack it a little. What do you think you should do? I think that's great. We gotta read the room and know when somebody is really stuck and needs help. So some of it is knowing the person.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I've had people say, and I believe that unsolicited advice is always seen as criticism. And I've had coaches that say all advice is seen as criticism. So anytime we're saying, hey, here's what I recommend, here's what I advise, if it's not preceded with, tell me more, let's unpack it. Where do you think we should go with this? What do you think we should do? It's probably going to be ineffective.
I'm going to pause for a second. It's Tyson, just so you know, not Tyler, just so you know. No, it's fine. It's fine. No worries at all. But just want to make sure.
It's embarrassing. So very sorry.
That's why this part we'll cut it. That's why I didn't want to put it on the clip. So the last thing you were talking about, you'd mentioned, what was the thing you just mentioned? Because I wanted to ask you about it.
Asking questions or tell me more? Or
okay. So about that, there's something I do, and maybe you can tell me if I'm doing this wrong. I'll say, sometimes I'll say, do you mind if I give you some feedback on this? Is that the same as just me saying, I'm going to, like, me just giving advice? Or because it's one of those things where I don't want to feel like I don't want employees to think I'm criticizing them if I'm giving them feedback. So if I come to you and say, do you mind if I give you some feedback on this? Is that okay?
I'd ask two questions. I'd say, one is this a black and white situation? Is this where somebody, you walked out of a meeting and somebody was, clearly had the wrong tone and had done something?
I'll say I reviewed someone's pleading. So they drafted a lawsuit. I'll just give something like that.
Yeah.
So I drafted a lawsuit, and there were some things that we should probably change.
Oh, yeah.
They're more stylistic
Absolutely.
than anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not I don't think my employees would describe me as someone that kind of criticizes them. I don't think.
Yeah.
But
We don't need to coddle people.
no. Yeah.
But we need to be curious. And the more curious we are, we'll both learn. I mean, one of our big, and it might be a tangent. Have you ever read any of his behavioral economics stuff like Danny Kahneman, like Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, Danny Kahneman, fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. So System 1 thinking is really hard for us. System 1 thinking is where we see something and we know what the answer is.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're right, but sometimes we're not. And if it were that easy, it probably wouldn't still be a problem. So slowing down sometimes and actually thinking about things, and also engaging somebody else in that thought so they learn along the way, can be worth 3, 4, 5 minutes.
You ever read the 12-week year by chance?
The what?
The 12-week year.
Uh-uh.
So I am drawing a blank on the author's name, but it's another really good book. And a lot of it's about like planning and, goals and all that. I'd say there's probably some overlap when it comes to EOS on a more personal level. I think the issue with maybe 12-week year is that it doesn't have more of a system to scale it for the organization. But there's a part that I thought I always liked. I did it for a while, and I've not done it in a while, but I'm pretty sure it was 3 hours a week dedicated to just thinking. And where for 3 hours, uninterrupted time, I'm talking completely uninterrupted, no interviews or no phone calls, no one knocking on the door, no cell phone. And I will say, like, there were some pretty powerful ideas that came out of that. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, as part of EOS, when we teach people LMA, which is Leadership Management Accountability, we recommend, strongly encourage a clarity break, which I think is best done on a weekly basis. I got about 40 minutes in me. So I don't know about, if you could do, I had a client that used to go hiking for 4 hours every Wednesday. And really he would hike and pray and think, and it was amazing for him. I just don't got that much in me. I don't have the patience for it yet. But I'm pretty good about a clarity break, and I think they're tremendously valuable. There's something that physically feels good to sit down without an electronic device and just start making some notes.
Yeah. Now that I kind of mentioned it, now it was a nice little break. I may go back. I may give it 40 minutes. I'm kind of with you. It's
yeah. I mean, this is atomic habit stuff. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I mean, If you can do 5 minutes, do 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, including myself, sometimes it's hard to make myself take 5 minutes away from everything and kind of take some quiet time. But,
Well, think about, this. I had this very situation Friday. I was like, okay, am I going to do this? And the thing that inspired me to do it was I knew if I do it Friday, I could take control of my Monday. Because I have a history, and not to bore you with my background, but I struggled with depression a lot of my life, and Sundays were terrible, just painful. And so on Friday, I'm like, look, if I do this now, Sunday's good. I'm going to take control of my Monday. I don't have to worry about it.
So I think hearing the stories like that, I think that's really relatable to, a lot of business owners, law firm owners. I think a lot of people experience that. Are there any other tools? So I guess actually let's dive into that a little bit more. What are you doing on Friday that sets you up on a Sunday so you're not feeling those, that depressive mood, and that sets you up for Monday? What are those things that you're doing on a Friday to make sure that you're set up right?
So I'm doing it Friday if I'm not with a client. If I'm with a client, I'll do it Saturday. I'm having a clarity break, and clarity break, you could read the EOS Life or anything, but I take about 45 minutes. I get quiet. I pray for a while. I clear my mind. I like to, start taking some notes. I like to write questions
Yeah.
Writing questions helps my mind.
Do you have a template you work from, or you just
Not really.
no? Okay,
No.
freestyling.
I have terrible handwriting, so I'll just make a list on a sheet of paper, and only I can read it, so I don't have to worry about anybody seeing it. But I'll just make a list, and what'll happen is things will start to bubble up, and it'll be like I was doing the other day. I was like, hey, I got a break in 2 weeks, and I haven't visited my parents in a few weeks. I need to carve out a day to go to Birmingham and see my parents. Or I've been selling, I haven't done any marketing work in about a month. I need to work on the top of the funnel. And you know what? I needed to reconnect with this coach, my facilitation coach. So it's a handful of things that I wouldn't think about when I'm in the thick of it day in and day out. And then I turn to, once I've done that and I've gotten all it listed, and that was, a deviceless time, I have about a 6-point checklist to do every week. I just turn to it, make sure those things are done. And then it gives me confidence. Again, I've said this a few times today. Confidence is the thing that that I've struggled with historically. I think a lot of people have not. Am I executing well on this thing? But am I spending my time in the right place? And this helps me regain that.
I want to hear about this 6-point checklist. Are these more personal items, like business items, a little mix of both? You're like, I've got to do these things.
Oh, it's just something. It's housekeeping stuff.
Yeah.
Make sure my email's caught up. Make sure my calendar is advanced, because I have a way of using my calendar where I actually move a bar down it that says what I've done and not done. Yeah. Make sure I've gone through my HubSpot, my CRM tasks. Make sure I've reviewed my sales and marketing process. Make sure I've updated my household financials. I think that's the last one. So I need a checklist so I can remember them all. But there's either 5 or 6 items in there.
I'm glad you shared that. It was I wasn't going to ask you for the specifics, but thanks for sharing, because like that. I didn't know if it was something you'd be comfortable sharing.
That's not rocket science. It's just a few things I want to make sure I do every week.
I think it's good for everyone to hear that. I'm looking for this study that I've got in here because I want to ask you about goal setting. So there's this Harvard Business Review. It's a study that found that 70% of employees feel more motivated and engaged when they have straightforward, measurable goals. How are you able to, with EOS, come up with goals at sort of every level? So, more at you've got, your company is going to have, their goals, their rocks and everything. And you're going to have each employee having their goals and teams, all that kind of stuff. How are you able to help implement that and then make sure that those are being hit on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm. First off, goals are goals. I mean, this needs scoped appropriately. One thing to start with is when we look at EOS, when we think about goals going down, don't hold yourself to trying to cascade them where each goal relates to the one above it, right? Sometimes people get caught up in, does this tie to that? You'll drive yourself nuts, right? Yeah. It's good to have, you have some correlation, that's fine, but they don't need to tie directly going down.
So that's interesting you say that. I've always kind of taken the opposite approach. So tell me, I want to hear more about that, because
I mean, it'd be great. Yeah. Okay, let's say that you have 6 company rocks, and you run the you run a litigation team, or you run the research team, or whatever you run, and one of your rocks, somebody in your department has a rock that ties to one of those company rocks. That's great. Yeah. That's nice. Okay. But don't try to make all 5 tie exactly. It's just this idea of making sure everything has to tie to something above it. It just too many variables in the equation to drive yourself nuts.
Okay. That makes sense. I interrupted you about goals. So you started with that.
And then we need to remember that if you're on the leadership team, you're required, maybe not the day you start, but at some point you're required to have time in your schedule to work on the business. I'm not saying you got to put it on the calendar, but you have to have some time to work on the business. And I'm doing this because you think about, here's all my time.
Yeah.
Some of my time goes to day-to-day stuff. Some of it goes to unexpected stuff, but there's got to be some up there to work on the business. And if we've been doing this a year and you're a leadership team member, you're telling me you don't have time to work on the business, then I'm telling you you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
You haven't structured things below you in a way that you can work on the business. Okay, so you're about to ask a
I was
question.
going to ask you, why wouldn't, I mean, surely it's preferable that they do put it on the calendar, right? Because you
Yeah.
said you don't have to, but
Yeah.
it's surely
That's great.
Okay. I don't know if you had a reason for not.
No, I don't have no, I didn't.
Okay.
You just don't have to.
Okay.
Some people, like I don't. That for me, it just doesn't work. I have vacant time on my schedule that I work on things, but I don't block on the business time.
Gotcha.
But if you can do it, that's great. All the better. So if you're a leadership team member, you have to have that time to work on the business. As we move lower in the organization, you're not going to have as much time. So you have to scope your rocks appropriately. And we may get to a point where if you're, if you're, guy or woman that drives a truck that goes out and does water mitigation, you're going to have less time for on the business, but you can still have a rock. I've had people, do that very job that built a little schematic. Here's how we need to restock the van every night. And by restocking the van every night, they saved like 1.2 return trips to the office per day.
Oh, wow.
Now in Atlanta, that's 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
So, this is creating real efficiencies. So we just need to scope them appropriately. And then we need to do a better job on our goals. There's a couple of things that we do that is harmful from a goal standpoint. One, we're usually not specific enough, right? Goals need to be specific. Okay, specificity creates energy. Okay, they also need to be attainable. And I want you to think about if I were coaching you, okay, if I were physically coaching you, and do you do any athletics? Or
Yeah,
run or lift weights?
I lift weights, play basketball. I love playing baseball growing up.
So I don't know much about lifting weights, but let's say that you can squat 1.2 times your weight.
Okay.
And I say, it's got to be 2 times today. Go for it. You're going to blow your knees up. Like something's going to blow up.
Sure.
Right. But if I say 1.1, you're going to be like, right. So we can put we need to put a little effort into it, but not so much that it's unattainable. Because if we do, right, if we stretch too much, then we set people up to fail. And I'd rather have somebody hit a slightly lower goal, have the wind, beneath them, so to speak, of being successful. So next quarter, they're successful.
I think it's funny. This kind of relates to the EOS coaching stuff. I really started hitting the gym about 2.5 years ago, like with an actual trainer. I hired a trainer. Mm-hmm. Before that, I worked out and kind of did, willy-nilly, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I went the longest time without asking actually, like, how much weight was I lifting? Because my coaches were my coach was trainer. He was like, it doesn't matter. Like, because they would track it. They mm-hmm. track the numbers, and they do it through an app and everything. And but I never knew the numbers. But they knew the numbers, uh-huh. and so they knew, okay, and they could say, okay, it looks like you need to go up here. And I just thought it was kind of funny how, like, I just never knew the numbers, and they knew the numbers, but uh-huh. I never knew the numbers. But I guess that kind of goes to, like, the importance of having, like, a coach, like someone like for EOS. You obviously need to know the numbers, but right. like having someone else that can also see the numbers and say, okay, or looking at the rocks and saying, okay, mm-hmm. you all are kind of slacking over here. You need to pick up the pace. You're not doing the things you say you're going to commit to. And so having that person like you kind of step and say, hey, listen, what are you doing here? It means a lot.
Right. And different people have different images of rocks. My favorite is probably, imagine I'm putting rocks in the side of a hill as a stepping stone. And it doesn't have, if I'm thinking of that analogy, it's got to be something that moves me up the mountain. But if it's 12 feet up, I'm not going to be able to reach it. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
And if it falls out after I put it in, that's not helpful. So as much as possible, we need to think of rocks as one, what's the outcome? But secondly, what's the system that perpetuates it's being put in place?
Yeah. It's funny. You call them, you use them as those, the sort of like the going up the mountain. I call them stepping stones. So very,
Right.
very similar
Same thing.
concept. Same thing. Like you're
Right.
you're trying to get down a specific path, which I think is it's a little different than the concept most people have, where you put the rocks in the bucket and you put the pebbles in the sand. It's different.
Yeah. And you got to work with people's wiring. Some people that resonates with, you familiar with Dan Sullivan, strategic coach?
Yes.
So he does he does good work when he talks about, he goes to the VODA, vision, obstacles, transformation, and action, I think. But this idea of getting a vision for what we want to make happen, and then just attacking the obstacles. Most of the time, the obstacles are the path. And so if you've got somebody that is that obstacle thinker, it's usually the finance person, but not always, right? You got somebody that's like they churn up work with that. Don't say, hey, be positive. Don't tell them be positive. Let's get a clear image of the vision, and then their rock can be to knock out these obstacles. Probably find we're there by the end of the quarter.
I have two more things I want to ask you about. The thing I want to ask you about next is, it's probably the thing I hear the most about when it comes to EOS. It's integrator versus visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And I do see a lot of law firms kind of struggle a little bit with the fact that, they feel like I'm a visionary, or they think they're a visionary and they need an integrator. But the integrator is someone that's hard for them to find, or a visionary is someone hard for them to find. And so they're like the one person at the top of the firm,
Mm-hmm.
the law firm owner is, and like finding that other piece. Do you have any advice for those people looking for that other piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I agree, because finding an integrator is hard.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, if you're an integrator and you don't have a visionary, that's fine. Don't sweat it. I'm not a visionary. I didn't have visionary in my business. You do need to find a mastermind group. You need to find some outside influence that's bringing in the external world and applying the pressure you need to keep growing. But if you're an integrator, you have a visionary, it's fine. Now, if you're a visionary and you don't have an integrator, you can sit in both seats for a while, but you're going to hamstring your growth. Right, you're going to compromise your growth. So if you sit in that situation for 6 months or a year, it's okay, but you eventually need to find an integrator. Now,
I do wonder how accurate is the online quiz that EOS has, because I am one of the odd people that falls into both camps.
Right.
So what about people like weirdos like me?
Yeah. Or just exceptional people. So you can cast yourself either way.
I like the way
you can cast yourself either way.
Yeah.
It goes down to, what do you like?
Mm-hmm.
When we do the people analyzer, we do the GWC, the get it, want it capacity. It seems like somebody in your case that's good at both, you might get and have the capacity for both. But what do you really want to do?
Sure.
What kind of activities do you really enjoy? And we don't have to have, this is a relationship where you have two people that really get each other, that complement each other. And my recommendation, if you're a client of mine, would be, if you get both sides, find an integrator that gets both sides. Find somebody that gets you, because they're gonna have to understand the way you think. And they're going to also, they may not need all the integrator horsepower because you got some of it.
Sure.
But then you've got to make sure you stay in your roles.
So this leads, I guess, a follow-up then. Are you saying that there should be two people?
Ideally, we should have a separate visionary and integrator. But again, we've got to work with the wiring we have. If you have an integrator and there's no visionary in the business and that person hasn't been coming along, don't worry about it. Find outside support that can be like that pressure on you. If you're visionary, eventually you need a separate integrator. A lot of visionaries fool themselves into thinking they can be the integrator, not because they like it being done right.
Yeah.
And they can muscle their way through it, but what they don't realize is the toll that's taken on them and what they're losing from a visionary standpoint. I was talking to a visionary last week, and what he realized was when he really got integrated in the business, he was able to spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring people down through the business. It's been phenomenal for them, right? It's not like, because he was like, he doesn't see himself as the guy that's, sitting in a dark room thinking all day.
Yeah.
He does think. And he doesn't see himself as somebody that's always out, doing external stuff, and he does that. But his kind of superpower has been, now that he doesn't lead and manage people, he can be down the business coaching and mentoring people and help this group, as long as he's not subverting anybody's authority on the accountability chart. It's been really powerful for them.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you a follow-up about how detrimental that could be and why. And so you covered that. That's perfect. I promised you one last question, so I'm going to give you that one. You've achieved a lot. You've gone through what, I mean, honestly, when it comes to the company that I guess it went under, right? Completely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That could destroy a lot of people. Like, that's something that could just, someone couldn't recover from. So I wonder, looking back, what inner beliefs do you think that you have that helped really keep you, help you stay true to yourself and to rebuild stronger than you were before?
I mean, the belief of the beliefs, the foundation of my beliefs is my faith. So as a Christian, I didn't like that situation, but I was confident. I don't know if confident, but at least I was confident enough that that God had his hand in it, that it would work out.
Was there anything that you would kind of say to yourself on a regular basis, just kind of get you through it?
Yeah, and this is probably less deep than you were hoping for.
No, not really. Because I think simple's
I think every
better.
every day I when I was broke, I had an opportunity to work out, hang out with my kids, take my dogs to the park, and have dinner with my wife. And it didn't matter how much money I had. I could do those things every day. So it's like,
So was
could be
it
worse.
just the fact that you were just grateful for what you had at that point? That's incredible.
And there's, if you don't have any money, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if I want to be there for an extended period of time, but there's some pluses to it.
Yeah. Well, appreciate it, Brett.
Thanks
so much.